Hi, guys. Welcome to Book Reviews with Fee. And today we're going to be reviewing the nonfiction book by Mark Wolynn, and it's entitled It Didn't Start With You. Now, when I first began this book, I found the summary intriguing. And then when I first started reading it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so interesting. So it's basically based on his website, it describes the book as detailing the psychology and the science behind traumatic experiences. And the gist of the theory is that some of the unexplained, like phobias, anxiety, depression, um, like psychological stress that we experience isn't based off of something we directly went through, but it is the expression of traumatic experiences of our forefathers, like our mothers, grandfathers, or someone in the lineage of our family. Um, so Mark kind of starts off a little more sciencey, and I was hoping that he would continue that thread, but it got a little weird and a little loopy and a little ghost stories near the end. So let me just give you some examples. So there is this idea, and I've heard this before, that your grandmother carries within her body the egg cells that contained your mother. And the egg cell that became your mother contained the embryo. Once your mother was conceived, contained in the embryo the was it oocytes? No, oocytes are after it's been fertilized. Well, the egg cells um, of you. So when your grandmother is pregnant, the fetus has the egg cell that became you. So if the grandmother experienced some type of trauma, the baby felt it and you felt it on a cellular level. And that, through gene expression, you can inherit the trauma of your ancestors. How it works with the father is that it's not three it's not three generational. It's more that the father has the fully developed sperm cells, so it's like a direct link. Um, so when the father experiences something traumatic, then the child, uh, through gene expression, the sperm cells can inherit that trauma. So after the first couple chapters, when he's going through the theory and the science behind it, he starts to give some anecdotal. Mark Wolynn, being a therapist, some of the anecdotal stories to support this claim. So there's this one story of like a girl who had like suicidal tendencies, and how she expressed it is that she's like, oh, I'm gonna vaporize. She's saying that she's gonna vaporize herself. um and she's using like this terminology. And when they started to dig deeper, and he would have his clients, inquire or have interviews with their family, her grandparents or grandmother, the entire family was killed during the Holocaust in the ovens. So she would say she would incinerate herself or vaporize herself. So that was the experience of her forefathers. And although her grandmother never spoke of it, that that un that inherited trauma manifested in the granddaughter. And how okay, so I'll get to how it's quote unquote healed in a little bit. So then there are other stories of people who survived like genocide and like Myanmar or not yeah Myanmar, I think, the Rwandan genocide. And there were people. So there was this little kid whose grandparents, whose grandfather was identified as like a conspirator or being suspected of being a part of the rival party, and a group of men murdered him with machetes by like, or pickaxes, like hacking at his head or whatever. So the grandchild, this trauma manifested in the grandchild with he was like pulling his hair out, and there's some kind of mania, it's called. Um, and when the discovery of the history of the grandfather, because this is also something, the mother and father, they escaped as like they were like refugees from that country, and they built a new life, and they never shared that trauma with anyone. So the manifestation of that from the grandson, they took him to all these therapists and doctors, and no one could explain why it was happening. And so it's because his grandfather died of a head injury, and he was subconsciously reliving that trauma by pulling at, oh, he not just pulling out his hair. I think he would bang his head against things, things of that nature. And there's this one story that gets even weirder, about this guy who he was not successful. He was a lawyer, but he was never successful. Every time he owed the bank money, he was not successful. And so Mark inquired and said, is there anyone in your bloodline that received ill-gotten wealth? And it turns out the grandfather owned a plantation where there were migrant workers who the grandson remembered playing with them as a child, the grandson now an adult lawyer, and they lived in squalor. They didn't receive correct wages, etc. So he inherited that debt to the migrant workers. So he tried to find them. He couldn't find them. So he ended up donating like all this money to like this organization that provided health care to migrant workers. And the grandfather he bequeathed the plantation to his son, the lawyer's father, and the father lost it through a series of bad investments and just not, so that ill-gotten wealth brought, this debt to this family. So how you heal this trauma, that's where it gets a little weird, because like for the kid with the grandfather, he's like, oh, put your grandfather's picture over like his bed and talk to him at night, and it was just kind of, a lot of it seemed a little where it crossed into some type of spiritual territory. So it crossed from like being science-based to some type of spiritual thing. Like some of the things, just like, okay, visual, like the girl with the Holocaust, the grandparents who died in the Holocaust, she's like, well, visualize them letting you know that they love you and they don't want you to suffer and they want you to be happy. Like I can understand something like that, because that's, you are internally facing that trauma and using visualization as a tool. But the whole like put your grandfather picture over your bed and talk to him, and I'm just like, you're crossing into some territory that I don't understand. And that's when he kind of lost me. And also, through all these descriptions, this is, from my understanding, an American author. Like, I didn't get any description of like the victims of slavery and Jim Crow, because that's a very American trauma that, like, what, millions and millions of descendants of slaves have inherited. And so it made me think of Viola Fletcher, who's the last survivor of the 1921 Tulsa massacre, and how, she's still alive. Like, he could have interviewed her. He could have interviewed her son. He could have interviewed, and maybe he tried, but I would love to hear how that type of tragedy, like, affected her genealogy, and how did others suffer based on the trauma, the unreconciled trauma, right, of Viola Fletcher, and also like the perpetrators of the Tulsa massacre. Like, I mean, I don't know if anybody would cop to like being in a massacre, the perpetrators of a massacre, but I wonder how the fallout for those who bombed an entire town, how that, how, what debt, like what karmic debt do their descendants owe or paid for or anything like that. And I just, now there may be a book that explores this, because there, once I finish the book, you know, they have all these suggested or related titles. So I'd be curious to know if there's anyone who's explored this in regards to American slavery. So if you have that information, please share, because I'd be interested in hearing about it. Um, yeah, so it's, I would recommend the book because it's it's intriguing, and it created a desire in me to learn more about this phenomenon. Because he has all kind of great reviews, like Oprah, at least on his website. He has all these like mainstream media recommendations. But yeah, I just I wanted more science, and I wanted more American traumatic tragedies to see like what is the fallout of that. Thanks.